Okay. And I'll give you a cue, Ty, right before I get us launched on the webinar.
Cool.
Okay, I'm going to start it, okay?
Okay.
All right.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for the MoCo Green Futures inaugural event. Our goal in setting up this event is to give an opportunity for youth to learn about green career pathways at an early stage. So hopefully in high school or early college, get exposure to green careers by meeting and talking to professionals and entrepreneurs that are in the field. So with that, I would like to give a shout out to our partners. Mansa Collabs, Samuel was key to putting together today's event with Evolve Green. I'm the co-founder of Evolve Green. And we had partners such as Montgomery County Department of Environmental Protection, really helped us with outreach and ideas at the early stage of this initiative. Leaders in Energy was also very helpful. Janine with the Leaders in Energy is on the call today and will probably put some shout outs in the chat. Leaders in Energy is a community of leaders working to scale and accelerate clean energy and sustainable solutions. They have a lot of dynamic events, and I've been involved with the organization. Waterford Inc. was also a great organization, works with leaders in energy, conducts green career workshops and career coaching, executive leadership training. And the great thing about Waterford is they're specialized in the green sector. Also want to give an update announcement that Leaders in Energy has a Green Jobs Forum that's coming up, and it's also a career fair. It's on Thursday, August 26th. This is the 8th annual fair, and it's virtual. So the website is there if you're interested in participating. It's leadersinenergy.org. And again, that's coming up on August 26th. So a little bit about MoCo Green Futures and myself. So as I mentioned earlier, our goal in starting MoCo Green Futures, which we started about a year ago, was to bring together Montgomery County youth with green professionals and learn about the opportunities in the field. It's obviously a very hot topic now to talk about climate change and environmental careers, and the more youth are able to learn about it at an early stage, it's helpful in making career choices and making an impact. So I've personally been in the field for about 15 years. I studied environmental science for my bachelor's degree and also for my master's degree. And I had the opportunity to work in the US Environmental Protection Agency as an intern, which is a federal agency based in DC, and also with the US Geological Survey, and then with industry and local government as well. So, a lot of broad opportunities that are available within the field. As you'll learn from our speakers today, there are many different ways to have an impact, to get into a career that makes an impact. And we're very grateful for our speakers that have agreed to join us on a Saturday morning. And we're very grateful for Jordi, who is also was key to putting together today's event. She's the project coordinator. And we had 3 interns that helped us as well, Tigist, Patrick, and Mubasira. So give a shout out to them for their assistance. And now I would like to turn it over to our first speaker. Omatola is a Paint Branch High School senior. Paint Branch High School is in Montgomery County, and she participated in the climate action plan that was developed in Montgomery County as a resilience ambassador. So it's very encouraging to see the interest of youth in the county. And she's also going to join us at the end for the Q&A session, but she's going to make some remarks at the beginning. So, as a Springbrook High School student, I am definitely glad to see that there's a lot of interest within the high school students to combat climate change. So Omatola, with that, I would like to turn it over to you. If you could turn on your video and take it on from here. I do want to also mention that there is a hashtag Go Green MoCo for those of you that are active on social media. Feel free to post. Thank you.
Okay, hello everybody. My name is Omatola Fede. I'm very blessed to be here, and yeah, I'll just share some of my thoughts. So, 2 years ago, the most I knew about climate change was from biology class and TV shows, blurbs about gases and heat and governments not doing their jobs correctly. A sense of urgency didn't set in yet, and even with data, oh, I'm so sorry. Okay, so blurbs about gases and heat and governments not doing their jobs correctly. A sense of urgency didn't set in yet, and even with data, charts, and photos on my Chromebook, environmentalism still remained a niche within my student body. An amalgamation of lectures, political undertones, and learned helplessness at such a young age made climate awareness the adults' conversation. But thankfully, I was able to break the mold of disinterest with the help of Montgomery County and the special opportunity to be an important player in the creation of the recent climate action plan. The county vowing to take actions I was taught was too much of a hassle for others. With the title of a climate resilience ambassador, I was not only front seat to information about climate global warming in general, but how it affected people like me and people who look like me. I was front seat to conversations about the inequities of Black and Brown people that would understandably make climate awareness take the backseat for a moment. The issues regarding infrastructure, accessibility, health, and others that would make our collective so much harder to reach with such important conversations in an otherwise large and powerful county. Filled with knowledge and understanding, I was ready to go into the real world, or at least the virtual real world, and get the stories myself, to document the issues that the Kamimar County already face that, oh, I'm sorry. Can everybody hear me well?
It's a bit low. Maybe if you can just speak a little closer to the mic.
I'll try that. Do you want me to like repeat like the speech? Because I can start over.
Sure, that'd be great.
Okay, I'm so sorry. It's just
No worries.
technology fails us sometimes. Okay, so 2 years ago, the most I knew about climate change was from biology class and TV shows, blurbs about gases and heat and governments not doing their jobs correctly. A sense of urgency didn't set in, and even with data, charts, and photos on my Chromebook, environmentalism remained a niche within my student body. An amalgamation of lectures, political undertones, and learned helplessness at such a young age made climate awareness the adult's conversation. But thankfully, uh, I was able to break the mode of disinterest with the help of Montgomery County and special opportunity to be an important player in the creation of the recent climate action plan. The county vowing to take actions that I was taught was too much of a hassle for others. With the title of a climate resilience ambassador, I was not only fronting to information about climate change in general, but how it affects people like me and people who look like me. I was front seat to conversations about the inequities of Black and Brown people that would understandably make climate awareness take the backseat for a moment. the issues regarding infrastructure, accessibility, health, and others that would make our collective so much harder to reach with such important conversations in an otherwise large and powerful county. Filled with knowledge and understanding, I was more than ready to go out into the real world, more specifically the virtual one, and get the stories myself, to document the issues that some of our county already face that need to be addressed before others can be made, to bring visions about an equitable and accessible county to the heads of who can make that happen. That's why I'm so honored to conduct interviews with Montgomery County residents, not only of the minority population, but especially with the youth who find themselves the most unfit for such a conversation in a room of adults. That's why our voices matter so much during this time. We'll soon lead the charge combating climate change, and it will only be a benefit to be involved as early as possible. With my tenure as an ambassador now over, I'm still with the energy to do whatever possible to bring conversations about climate change and equity to the table, whether it be through other employments, volunteering, and speaker opportunities like this, reminding everybody that defeating climate change is a collective effort and should include all. Is that good enough? Like, can people hear me well? I'm so sorry.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Omatola. It's really interesting to hear sort of your engagement at the very local scale, and also being able to communicate and work with the county directly to ensure that all voices are heard in the climate action planning. So, you know, it's wonderful that you started this at such an early stage. So grateful to you and look forward to hearing from you in a little bit. So next, we'd like to turn over to our first speaker, Dr. Castro Citereche. He's a professor of electrical engineering and co-director of the Center for Hemispherical Cooperation and Research and Education in Engineering and Applied Science. And he's joining us from Puerto Rico, and he works at the university in Puerto Rico. So that explains the wonderful background he has there. And we really look forward to hearing from you and learning about your experience in this field. So thank you.
Thank you. Buenos dias. Good morning. I'm happy to be here from the west coast of Puerto Rico. It's hot and humid here. I have a family here. I'm home, and there might be some noises in the background. I hope they're not too loud. Sometimes some birds, some lambs sometimes. So just to give that ahead of time. I am very happy to be here to talk a little bit about my experience, and also about some possibilities of work, and how that can be relevant for the people in Montgomery County. Thank you for the invitation. I was born and raised in Puerto Rico, so I'm a Boricua. We learn English in school. We don't speak, so I'm still learning to improve my English, but I did go to university in Puerto Rico and also in the United States, and that helped me to get by in some ways. And what I want to share today is a little bit of my path. And I started with an interest in electronic stuff, even though I didn't know it was electronics. And so my father told me, like, oh, okay, if you like that kind of things, then you need to do electrical engineering or electronic engineering. So that's how I started in that path of electrical engineering. And then when I was in midway my academic career, I wanted to find ways to make a difference. I noticed that there was many things that needed change, and it was not that easy from engineering to see how I could do that change. And I took a class that had an impact. It was a philosophy class, a philosophy of technology. And it talks about how technology changes our lives, how technology is not neutral because it changes the way we live. And I almost changed major to philosophy, but then I decided to work within engineering. And it has been an interesting journey with a lot of challenges that are mainly related to how to combine that desire to change the world for the better, but from the engineering that is usually highly technical, and most people are more concerned about keeping the voltage or the current regulated, and not so much about the quality of life that could provide to people. And so I I finished electrical engineering, focused on control systems, and then I went to graduate school. But before that, I did a year of exchange in Virginia Tech, which learned me a lot of things, helped me to learn a lot of things about the United States that I didn't know. I learned a lot about, for example, racial tensions that I was not aware of, things that I thought were from the past that you see in movies. I realized that they were very present. I experienced those tensions, even though for Puerto Rican, I look more like European-like, but when I was in Virginia Tech as an exchange student, and my accent, I experienced the what is to be different, and I learned about my good friends like Samuel Surafel that invited me, and I learned a lot about African student association, and that was part that I treasure in my educational path. And I have friends up to this day that I made in that year. And then when I was applying to graduate school, because the jobs that I was able to get, they were mainly related to things that didn't improve quality of life, but that actually destroy life in some ways. I went to Howard University thanks to a grant, a research scholarship that I got. I went for a summer there, and then I I was able to experience Howard, and it was not only in the classroom. It was a very intense academic experience at Howard. Is hard. Is difficult. Like Virginia Tech was difficult, and like here in Mayagüez, there are difficulties. But I also value what I learned outside of the classroom at Howard. I became an activist with the Amnesty International chapter. So I learned about police brutality. I learned about death penalty and racism throughout the system. And I also learned about appropriate technology, which is how to use technology to empower communities. And that's something that up to this day is perhaps the core of my research and here at the University of Puerto Rico in Mayagüez. And I owe that to Howard community. And there at Howard, I had the sense that most students just wanted to get a degree and get a job. The same here in Mayagüez in Puerto Rico. But most of my friends and the people that I learned from, they wanted to change the world. And that is something that really stuck with me, and the same thing with some faculty that are still my friends. So Howard University, which is very close to you in Montgomery County, was a place that I learned a lot, and I owe a lot to Howard University and the community. I was there from 2000 until 2008. When I came back here to Puerto Rico in Mayagüez, I started working as a faculty member. And my dissertation was on motor control using artificial intelligence. And it's very interesting. There is a lot of math involved, and artificial intelligence is a fascinating field. But I was missing the intensity of changing the world, how we can improve people's lives. I was missing that, but the good thing is that because of my work with appropriate technology at Howard, which I got to publish with professors involved in that area, and a conference was started when I was there, and we did a trip to Cuba also to learn about how they use technology. I had that other interest, and I was hired to work on energy here, not controls. So that gave me the opportunity to then broaden up my areas of research. I started focusing more on power electronics, which was related to motor control, but not. I didn't work as much before. And the first research grant that I got, I applied to many more traditional technical, but the one that I got funded from National Science Foundation was based on appropriate technology. And we proposed to explore how to use technology to empower communities. And one of those communities that we proposed to look at was Dushiti in rural Haiti. So that gave me the opportunity to learn from communities such as that, and to start looking at energy access justice in terms of the rural electrification that is needed in places like Haiti, and also how the energy consumption impacts our well-being, how we can improve our well-being when we start consuming more, but after a certain point, then our lives do not improve more if we increase our consumption. And actually, beyond certain point, our quality of life start to deteriorate if we consume in excess. So that is something that also became part of my research. And so then we not only started working on how to provide the poor communities, people that have lack access of energy, a minimum level of energy access, but also how, and this is sometimes harder in the context of the United States and Puerto Rico, how we consume less to live better. And to this day, that's still part of my research challenges, and one of the things that we look at. For example, I'm going to go forward a little bit just to give a highlight that I have a doctoral student that just finished this year. She defended her dissertation, and her work was focused mainly on this, like explore how does our electricity consumption in different areas, for example, using turning on the lights, the refrigerator being on, using it to wash clothes, how does that impact our quality of life, and how maybe an excess of having the TV on too long can also decrease the quality of life. So her dissertation work was based on that, and I'm proud that actually the two doctoral students that have worked with me and successfully defended, they both look at something related to electricity, energy, access to energy, and quality of life. So that's a blessing that I have been able to combine those things. And so continuing my journey and my trips, let's say, after I went to Haiti a couple of times, I also wanted to explore the access to energy in the continent of Africa. So I applied for a Fulbright scholarship to go to Kenya and look at how microgrids can improve the quality of life of people, mainly solar microgrids. There were some issue at that time. That was 2013, 2014. So the Fulbrights were canceled to Kenya, but I was able to go to Tanzania in Arusha, and it was a very rewarding experience to be at the Nelson Mandela African Institution of Science and Technology, and that's where I met the first doctoral student that I had that finished his PhD in 2017. So I spent 2014, 2015 in Arusha, Tanzania with my family. And that gave me another perspective, because I was there looking for solar microgrids, but I found individual systems, and that made me reevaluate, like, what do we need to do? Because we need to start where people are, where are the communities? And that's also up today part of my research in terms of not just look at microgrids, but how can we build microgrids from the bottom up? And that's something that I have been talking about, and also doing some research how to build them from the bottom up. But the main thing, and what is constant, is to put the communities first. Sometimes we might have technologies that are interesting and that they have potential, and sometimes there are some buzzwords attached to it. But even with the best intentions, sometimes we can do more harm than good. And that is something that I learned with the appropriate technology, that you first go to communities and see what are their needs, and if you can collaborate with them. I don't really go to help communities because that we can do more harm than good, but we do have to fulfill our responsibilities. For example, I have had a privileged access to education since I was growing up, so I owe my communities and other communities a similar access, and it's part of my duties to see how I can expand that, and that's something that we need to keep working on. So that's something crucial in the work that I always try to do, and sometimes we make mistakes in communities, and we need to acknowledge, and and continue improving, always putting the communities first. And something that I have clear is that we always learn more from the communities, and we take more from the communities than what we give, even if we provide them some benefit. And that there's never a balance in that. We always take more and learn more. And so in terms of my academic journey, where I am right now is I'm working here on research, but I have focused also on Puerto Rico, because after 2017 and the Hurricane Maria that destroyed the electric system, there were communities that spent 11 months without electricity. What is normal, what is considered a long blackout in the US is maybe 2 weeks. For example, with Sandy, there were people that were 2 weeks without power. In Florida also with Irma, we're talking about 11 months without grid power. So we did work on that, and now we are still doing research on how to best use the reconstruction funds to improve people's lives and also to reduce vulnerabilities. And so I don't have a lot of time to talk about details, but maybe in the questions we can talk more about that particular part, because there might be opportunities for other people to collaborate with us. It's important to always give relevance to their local, but there are some strategic collaborations that can happen. And I think that same thing should apply to Montgomery County. The local people in Montgomery County needs to benefit the most from their programs, but there might be some strategic alliance that can work for them. And so to finalize, to me, the main thing was, how can I change the world for the better? And I have realized for a while now that if we really want to change the world, we need to prepare. We need to get our preparation, get our knowledge, our skills. For example, teamwork is very important. Technical aspects are important too. Working with communities and knowing the theory is important. But we also need to get ready to fight, because nothing changes without a fight. And with fight, I don't mean throwing rocks necessarily. Right now, there are different fights in Puerto Rico for the access to the beach. Rich people building pools pretty much in the beach right now, 20 minutes from where I live. But also the main fight is to get ready intellectually, to get focused, and to hold your principles. The best fighters are not necessarily the ones that throw more rocks, but the ones that are ready to make a stand with their principles and then not give up. That is something that is difficult. It could be difficult sometimes financially. I cannot say that I have suffered through it, but only God knows what's going to happen next. So I would finish with that. That we need to, if we need to work with for climate change. Climate change is not enough. We need to work with environmental justice and energy justice. So we need to prepare to change, and also we need to make sure that there is justice in it, and there is always going to be a struggle that we need to be ready for. And I am hoping to join you in your struggles for energy justice and environmental justice, and I hope we can start different collaborations in that line. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to continue the conversation throughout the morning.
Thank you so much. That was really inspiring, and it's great to hear that you're community centered, because I'm sure as a technical person, it's more natural to kind of come in and say, I have the solution for you, versus asking the community and working with the community. We're going to have time for questions at the end, but just wanted to see if you could share your social media, Twitter or website, so people could follow up with you and learn more about what you're doing.
Sure, I'll put it in the chat.
Okay.
Perfect.
Thank you. And we'll move on to our next speaker. And as I mentioned earlier, we will have time to ask questions of the speakers at the end. So with that, I would like to introduce our next speaker, Hyun Ra. She's a friend, actually, which is great, a Washington, D.C.-based sustainability and resilience strategist. She advises developers, investors, and policymakers in real estate, renewable energy, and hotel resort development sectors. So very excited to hear about Hyun's work and her background. And with that, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, and you can see me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So as Ty mentioned, my name is Hyun Ra, and I'm the principal and founder of Ra Solutions. It's a consultancy focused on helping real estate and renewable energy developers and investors align their financial goals with environmental and social sustainability, and also reducing their water, energy, and community risks. I also teach courses on taking a systems-based approach to sustainability and resilience at the University of the District of Columbia and for Goucher College's History Preservation Master's Program. I serve on the Design Review Board panel for Baltimore County, and I'm the National Chair for the Environment and Sustainable Development Committee for the National Federation of Business and Professional Women's Clubs, which is one of the oldest advocacy organizations in the country for working women. I'd like to start by thanking Ty and the other organizers for having me here to share my experience. So what I'm doing right now for career is something that I really grew into, and a job that really didn't exist when I started my career path. And it has required a lot of try and error, figuring things out on my own. So I think that forums like these to share with future professionals on what is out there is really important. And I also wanted to just give a quick shout out to Omatola. It's really great to see you get involved in such a young age in this and share your experience with us. So on that note, I think if somebody told me 20 years ago that I'd be living in DC, running my own sustainability consulting business and teaching at universities, I probably would have wondered about this person's mental fitness, because just wouldn't have sounded right. And it definitely has not been a straightforward path for me since I graduated from college with a degree in architecture and minor in Japanese. So I started my career in the built environment sector in 2005 at an international architecture and planning firm in Seattle. And the firm that I worked at specialized in designing and planning luxury destinations around the world. I think like the one that Marcelo just described, actually, often waterfront or other pretty environmentally sensitive locations. And the Seattle office was a small office of a big corporate body. So for me, starting out, it was really the best of both worlds in terms of having the resources of a big company and getting to take up different responsibilities that I think would have taken much longer in a bigger office, like chatting with clients and interfacing them regularly and coordinating with external consultants. LEAD, which is completely mainstream now, and the concept of sustainability in general was not at all mainstream at the time when I started. And it's something that I really grabbed onto and tried to convince clients and my colleagues to take up in a big way. I realized early on that nothing really happens without convincing the people that are in charge of money and policy. And in my role, really, I had the direct connection to the developers and investors. And so I spent a lot of time figuring out how to influence the decision makers to make more sustainable development design choices, not just for their bottom line, but also for the people in the community and the people that worked in these facilities, and also to educate my colleagues to do the same. I got to be a part of designing pretty interesting projects, including the first LEED Platinum boutique hotel in the country, and helping other clients sign up to get their projects LEED certified. You might be familiar with the fact that architecture is a very time-intensive industry. and very, very labor intensive industry, and it's all true. And after 3 years, I was ready to go back to school to get my professional master's degree in architecture at the University of Michigan. So my goal for my master's degree was to figure out how to practice architecture, stay in the field, but do it in a way that integrated sustainability in a more holistic way. And during my graduate studies, I found myself focusing more and more on water and natural systems and infrastructure rather than individual buildings. And even after I graduated, I didn't really know what else to do besides architecture because that's all I knew still. And so I took up a project management position at a green studio of a big architecture firm after my master's. And that was really what made me realize that I needed to step outside the traditional architecture practice. So my early realization that I had of the need to convince people in charge of financing to move things forward remained the same. And I wanted to get a much better understanding of the priorities and the thought process of the people that I really need to get the buy-in from, like the technical consultants and financial decision makers and the policymakers. Or the policymakers, I feel like the public good was good enough and I didn't really need to make the financial argument. So to be able to effectively quantify and really to back up the design choices and the community engagement steps and to get better technical background in water management, I decided to go for a master's program in water management and hydroinformatics. This was through a European Commission sponsored program in 4 different universities in Europe. So during and after the program, I got to work on transboundary water issues in Germany and urban flood risk management projects in Northern England. And besides the technical knowledge that I gained, which was a lot, I had to work really, really hard as somebody that didn't have any engineering background in a master's program with other engineers. And it was a really informative and eye-opening experience to work as a part of a team of engineers as an insider and to understand their thought process and work process and how they made decisions and what factors that they considered. So after I finished my master's program, I returned to Seattle um, and opportunities to help start a water management practice for an engineering firm in DC came up, which is how I moved out east. And following that, I was offered a chance to launch a nonprofit organization focused on providing energy and water security to marginalized communities in sub-Saharan Africa and in India using renewable energy and sustainable water management practices to help the community members kickstart their path to self-sufficiency. And in 2017, that was 4 years ago already, I decided to start my own consulting practice, which is what I'm doing now. It's called Raw Solutions. And I help decision makers closer to home, so investors, developers, and policymakers to take a holistic approach to development. With all the floods and droughts and other disasters posing enormous risks to built environment projects, it seemed like the right time to finally consolidate all the background that I had into a coherent approach. And another thing that I took up that same year actually is developing and teaching a course at the University of District Columbia, which I was really happy to come across and was flattered to be approached by because the course that I ended up teaching is and developing is a course that I wish I had in college. And a year later, I took a similar approach to developing a course in sustainability and resilience for the History of Preservation Master's Program in Goucher College in Baltimore. In terms of the skills required for my job, I mean, technical skills to be able to understand, analyze, and synthesize technical findings, reports, and to handle data related to the built environment, of course, are very, very important. I spent a lot of time keeping up with the latest research, trends, and events, because everything is connected. And also writing and speaking at different forums and exchanging ideas with people in the field in general, but specializing in different things. That said, there are character traits, I think, that are not as easy to learn as the technical aspects. A lot of my work requires navigating uncertainties, and I think it's actually really important to not to be intimidated by unplanned changes that come up, and also some challenging personalities that you might come across. Collaboration, as the previous speaker also mentioned, is essential, especially not letting different views deter me from working together towards a goal. It's important to understand that what's important to you might not be very important to the other person that you're engaging with. And I mean, I don't want to sound too dramatic, but things have been happening in the last year and a half on top of the pandemic that's just been very, very dramatic. And I think that the challenges we're faced with as the human race is just too great to assume moral high ground and turn people away from being on your team. I think we simply do not have the time. So being a good listener and trying to speak to the things that other people care about so that we can all work towards the same goal, I think is just essential. We cannot not do that really right now. Another key skill to have is ability to figure out the limitations and boundaries in terms of the site you're working with, policy and regulations, and the organizations and people that are involved as soon as possible to make the most resourceful and creative decisions that you can make within the limitations that are given. So I'm going to stop right here. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have now if we have time, Ty, because I'm not sure if I'll be able to stay for the Q&A session at the end. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. It was wonderful to hear, because you don't always hear about architecture and water. So that's a great background. And let me see if there are any questions in here. Oops, I raised my hand by mistake. But one question I have is, if you see the architectural field changing to kind of accommodate more of the water issues and energy issues, or in the educational aspect, or if it's still pretty traditional and it's the sort of the certifications that come in afterwards to address environmental issues.
So I think that's a tricky question to answer, actually, right? Architecture in the United States, I mean, the programs have to be accredited. And so there are certain requirements that go with accreditation, that courses you have to teach, certain knowledge that you have to transfer to the students. So those are non-negotiable. But that said, there are electives, and in fact, the course that I teach at the moment is a required course for undergrad students if they're majoring in architecture. And I think they're definitely, with a forward-thinking administration and faculty members and leadership of the program, there are definitely ways that you could accommodate changes, and we have to really, because things are fast changing and in a rate that we hadn't thought about before. So I see more programs that are at least adding courses, if not the direction of the curriculum, which is a lot harder to do, as you know, taking that step. And in fact, we talked about the Association of Architecture Schools that started awarding courses on climate change in society, and actually lauding different schools and faculty members that are leading in these efforts. So there is definitely a lot more prominence than when I was going to school in this topic. And what I would love to see is to have these programs take like a program curriculum-wide approach that's more involved than just individual courses. And I think it's necessary.
Great. Yeah, thank you. And we do have one more question. Can you tell us a little bit more about the systems course you're teaching and how?
How long do we have?
how it's helping to make change? And I know you've received an award for the course, so if you could share a little bit about that as well.
Sure, and I'd be happy to share the link for the syllabus as well, because it's online. Basically, the premise of the course, which is my mantra, is everything is connected. And how I go about it is to look at architecture, the built environment, as a system, rather than just looking at a building as a single object, which I think has been sort of a traditional way to look at buildings and the built environment in general. So how I start the course usually is to look at a house, maybe it's like a shack, but a modern house has running water, electricity, waste that we produce, wastewater, and also just garbage in general. And just the virtue of having those things makes it part of the system, right? Because where does the water come from? Where does the electricity come from? Where does your waste go? And so even if it's just a simple little building, that is already part of the system. So that's where we start. And then I take the students through different scales of the built environment, visiting different types of climate regions and cultures and things like that. But starting with a product scale, like a pen, for example, is part of the built environment because it's man-made. And you might just look at a pen, but if you think about it, to make the pen, it probably came from a factory, which is a building, a facility, which has a lot of energy and water and labor intensive requirements. And with that comes transportation, supply, and so it's all part of the system. And then we scale up from there to interior environments, architecture, landscape that are man-made, which there are a lot, as we know. And then just keep scaling up to infrastructure and the environment. And then we look at how all of those things really affect how we live day to day, and what we do, even a single action that we take affects the whole system over time because it's accumulative. And water system is something that I talk about a lot. And again, I don't want to dominate the whole hour or whatever either, but I think water literacy is really, really, really important. And that's something that I spend a lot of time talking about because energy, I think, tends to get a lot of funding. And there is a need for that. But I think we can live without energy for a lot longer than we can live without water. Water, I think the common wisdom is that you can last 3 days without water and then we literally perish. And there are a lot of issues, water, usually it's too much water, too little water, or it's not the right quality of water. And again, it's all connected. So that's another thing that we talk about a lot. Yeah, but I'm going to stop right here because I don't want to take up, because I can talk about this forever, actually, as you know.
Yes. Yeah, thank you very much. It would be great if you can share information on the course. And there are a few more questions in the chat that you could address if you have time.
Okay. Yeah, I'll hang around for a little bit longer and then
okay.
I'm sorry that I cannot stay till the very end.
Sure, no problem. So, yep, so we'll move on to the next speaker. And thank you very much, Hyon, for sharing your experience in the field. Our next speaker is Dr. Tyrone Hall. And Dr. Tyrone, I'm just going to read just the first sentence from your bio, and you can take it on from there. Tyrone is a climate change specialist with over a decade of in-country research, intergovernmental and industry experience across the Americas, Sub-Saharan Africa, India, and the Pacific region. So I love the international experience that our speakers have today. And with that, I'll turn it over to Tyrone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ty. Thanks to you, thanks to Sam and the other organizations for the invitation to be here today. It's exciting to talk with people at the early end of their career or anyone just sort of thinking about the sustainability space, because I remember just what a in process, careful set of work I had to do and thinking in order to make it work for me. So just thinking back to the two presentations we've heard so far, is that because sustainability is a whole society issue, it touches on every element of our lives. It's interconnected. It's a connecting point. So if you think about networks, it's kind of that central node. So you can really enter the sustainability space and have a meaningful career from any vantage point. And I think my journey to this space, to being at Manifest, which is a software company that just transformed in January from being a consulting outfit, linking AI, linking sort of artificial intelligence in general with climate expertise, and specifically trying to say to corporates, financial and non-financial services firms, you can take action. And we're gonna take you by the hands and walk you through using our software to show you what your climate risks are in specific terms across your supply chain, across the assets, if you're an asset manager and within your portfolio, and then spotlighting them, which is useful for investors as well. And then not just stopping there, but mapping out the opportunities that you can get ahead of. So not thinking about your disclosure obligations to the markets, for instance, as just a box checking exercise, which risks greenwashing, but being able to take meaningful action. So how did I get to this space? First of all, I just say, I think of what I do and what my skill sets are in three broad buckets. I do executive advisory services, I do media relations, and then on the sustainability side, I do climate strategy, primarily, again, pulling back on media relations skill set with messaging and policy analysis. And how I've been able to get to this place is from undergrad. I'm Jamaican. I studied journalism as an undergrad. And the thing that I got really interested in when I studied journalism and comms was how you can use communication as a substantive function to distill policy issues. So that's what I got clued in on at undergrad. These big societal issues we're trying to manage. How do we parse them and engage general publics about them? Or from a bottom-up perspective, how do you take the issues that a society is amped up about and profile them for policymakers so it gets on their radar? And I took that at the end of undergrad, and I went right into a master's program in Massachusetts at Clark University, where I studied international development. And then my specialization was in environmental issues. How do we communicate those big issues? And how I locked in on the environmental side was also just being a voracious reader and interested in my country and policy issues. There's a massive wave of investment in the Caribbean, in Jamaica, in Central America, in Puerto Rico, in Dominican Republic at the time, coming out of Spain. And of course, those are regions that are heavily dependent on tourism. And there was this angst, sure, money's coming in, but the public was also concerned about what this would do to their communities. The governments were willing to compromise on the extent to which they do environmental impact assessments. And of course, they're dependent on or beholden to the investors. This is a fresh wave of investment in a region that is hungry for it. It provides jobs, it gives you hard currency. So you can pay for the medicine in the hospital and pay the teachers and the nurses. So they're willing to compromise, and investors weren't willing to go through all the box checking and risk losing the pristine beaches that they could perch their big hotels on. So there was this standoff by these three broad groups. And I saw an opportunity at the time to meaningfully use the interests I developed at undergrad in how do you bring these people on side, these disparate groups on side with a messaging mindset and an understanding of the environmental space. So I found a grant from the Compton Foundation in California, got a ton of money from it, I think about $15,000, and I did some research, went and immersed myself in the community, found community groups, made contacts as well in government, with civil society more generally, and with hotelier groups, and started talking with them, distilling what their challenges were, wrote my master's research paper on it, and did a bunch of roundtable talks, made a couple of recommendations, felt really good about putting something on the table at that point that could bring people together, or at least to some extent. There was some movement on it that this could be a productive tool that protects all of us. It's useful for investors as well to know and to meaningfully pursue environmental risk assessments. So I took that, left undergrad, moved out to DC. So familiar with the space. It's while being in DC that I met Samuel many years ago. And I worked on USAID's Global Broadband and Innovations Program, did a bunch of work on policy briefs, looking at what the gaps were, especially around agriculture and natural resources conservation in Central Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa in general, and other parts of the world, and looking at how you could deploy ICT tools, technology, apps to help to manage some of the challenges. And I got more interested in the natural resources side because, again, it connected with what I focused on for my master's research, and felt energized by that. Opportunities came up to move to Central America and work squarely on the climate change challenge. I was immersed in developing tools for insurance companies and doing trainings with them, distilling messages for different sectors, for policy advisors, for community groups, worked extensively with indigenous groups, the Mayan population in Belize. And I just got to a point where I got tired of just checking boxes. I wanted to really take on messaging challenge, because sustainability is primarily a communication challenge. How do you get people engaged, and not just engaged, but how do you allow key line ministries, for instance, a finance ministry, to recognize that all the great budgeting and forecasting you're doing is at risk if you aren't taking into consideration climate risks. So I wanted to focus on, based on the challenges that I was seeing in distilling messages just based on projects, I wanted to focus on that. So I left a job I loved very much, moved to Canada, designed this really ambitious research project, and pursued a PhD, which had field work in Fiji, India, Belize, and here in Canada on the global vantage point as well, looking at the Paris Agreement. I lucked out in that I had a fantastic supervisor. Funding came through, enormous amounts of funding. It's funding I didn't anticipate I'd have when I moved here. I won a Vanier scholarship that just paid for everything. The dream I walked in with, I could pursue that. That's unusual. But I guess when you're really committed to it and you put forward the big vision of what you want to do with the details, and really search for the funding support, you will find it. And I would also say that we're just at a critical point where the resources exist for any good idea that you can push forward. It will just take some work to do the base research of what is your target list for funding, and how do you tie that up with the spaces that you're going to be looking at. And I was able to pull together that research and I always do this dual track, thinking through how do you service a general audience, and then how do you get to a technical and a policy audience, because you want to get a full value chain of the decision-making process. And that's been a challenge for me because I come from a comms perspective as well. So I get that listening is a challenge for societal change to happen. So that's why I kind of take that approach with things. In terms of what I've done since graduating out of that PhD program 2 years ago, it's been a bit of a whirlwind. I straddled doing a postdoc, which is researching, again, some more community applied work, with being a full-time advisor for policy and media relations for an alliance of small island states within the UN system. That was a fantastic experience for me. It's around the time of COVID, when the world was really gripped with things. We pivoted and did something fantastic, which I think is a highlight of my career and my team's work at that time. is that we linked the climate agenda with COVID. We were one of the first groups to do it because we had a huge global conference with the Secretary General lined up and so on at the time. And we just pivoted and linked it to a green recovery program. And it went so well that another opportunity came up for me with the NDC partnership in DC. So I should have moved to DC, but I haven't. Toronto is an amazing city. You should visit when you get a chance. And I worked on a range of things with the NDC partnership. And one of the primary things was working on the messaging framework for a green recovery initiative that would literally deploy advisors to finance ministries across the developing world to help them to link their stimulus response packages to COVID with the climate agenda. So again, linking back to the work I did at AOSIS, linking back again to my longstanding commitment to ensuring that how we understand and how we talk about climate is that it is a systemic issue. It's not an issue out here, or sustainability itself isn't an add-on. It is the core. It is like the whole infrastructure that we exist within. So you shouldn't think of it in piecemeal formats. And that's been my big message, like the driver that I've come to my work with, and that's how I connected with Manifest. It's a startup company in the acceleration phase. And so of course, when you're in a startup environment, you have to wear multiple hats. We're squarely focused on climate. So that appealed to me, that it's squarely focused on climate. It's averse to greenwashing. It's very applied. And the team understands interdisciplinary mindset. And that fits well with the climate challenge because like I was saying, it's a whole society issue. It's not a piecemeal thing. So if you're a lawyer, you can come to this space. If you're a finance expert, you can come to this space. If you're an engineer, if you're an architect, if you're a policy thinker, if you're a cultural analyst, you can come to the sustainability space. But I think it's important to think through how you're coming to the sustainability space and the goals that you have, because otherwise your expertise will be treated as an add-on. So think through carefully what it means and understanding the issue as the core and that you're adding some value to the solution finding. And that's been helpful for me because I play 3 roles at Manifest. I'm a climate strategist, and so I lead the building out of one of our 3 software modules, which is Learn. So we're doing whole education advisory services. So sure, we've got this. The main module is where you come in and we crawl all of your disclosures and say, these are the things you're missing. These are some trends you need to take note of. But if you're not a climate expert or if you're just an internal lead for ESG, you are still going to say, what does this mean? So then they want to ask such strategists. So I'm building out the whole team with educational services and a whole educational map. And if you're into graphic design, if you're into educational learning, you would love it because it is really engaged learning and meeting you where you are to allow you to ask questions and then also move you through a particular knowledge path. And then I have other colleagues who are more dedicated and focused on a module that's doing trends and spotlighting. So if you're a great journalist or if you're into data journalism or if you're just an analytical mind coming from finance, it's a great place for you to be. And so that's my primary role. But then the other side, I play a role as kind of a chief of staff doing comms and strategic advisory for positioning and stuff. So I have to be talking to all the teams. So it's interesting to hear that a key message coming out is maneuvering the difficulties in the workplace. And I would say, like my strategy is, but you will always have folks with different mindsets and coming from different vantage points and different worldviews, because it is a space that requires you to have interdisciplinary expertise. So my strategy is usually, I'm confident in what I know. So I put it on paper and I'm willing to be vulnerable with it, and then just sharing it with the team and saying, giving guidance, brief guidance about where that thought process is coming from and asking for specify the kind of comments that you would like. So you're helping your colleagues with how they engage with what's on the table. And I find it fascinating that when you ask folks to do things transparently and you are transparent, it manages what's put forward and it allows you to have really productive collaboration. I found that really helpful. It's helped me to have a global view of different things and play the two roles without being overwhelmed, because you can feel that way if you're in a startup environment. Big takeaway as you think through how you want to enter the space, if it's just directly going straight into, say, a specific sustainability finance program or a program that's in anything that's sustainability focused, or do you want to pursue being a lawyer and then coming at environmental law or an engineer and then finding your way here? I just think there's one key principle at the heart of the climate challenge, which is really the driver and the agreements underpinning that it should be the driver of anything we talk about with sustainability, is just a principle of the just transition. It is a social justice issue as much as it is an economic issue, as much as it is an environmental issue. We should always remember that. I find it troubling when we miss that element of it. We're doing it, even if we engage from the vantage point of it being an economic imperative to act or driver to act, we should always remember that we should ensure that we get maximum social value out of it or benefits. And that principle is a reminder that I tend to use myself throughout my work. I'll stop there. I'm happy to answer questions that you have when that opportunity comes up this morning and share contact details.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. That was really inspiring. And the theme that keeps coming up is the need for communication and interdisciplinary work, which is key. And, you know, a lot of the schools are set up with one track. So it's interesting that, you know, you can kind of diversify and learn different forms of communication. There are a few questions in the chat. Let me see, I can just ask one question and then we'll go on break, and then we'll have more questions at the end. Somebody's asking about chemical engineering and how you think that might help with sustainability.
That's a fantastic question, because as I was sharing, the Manifest team is incredibly interdisciplinary, and two of my colleagues are trained chemical engineers. My team is literally, I'd say, 20% engineers, various specialties, lawyers, and accountants. So I'm sort of an oddball in the mix. You can come at it from very many standpoints, in that the real estate sector, for instance, is at the greatest risk of losing its relevance at this point, because so much of the critical assets are perched along the coast or near the coast. So getting building codes right and embedding as an ethic within the culture in the field and in the business community that this is good for business, it is a smart approach, is a good place to start. There'll always be opportunities for that to be emphasized. And then the other key thing I'd say to you is, there's this idea that a lot of what engineers can do is that they can help us to adapt. Even though we always talk about mitigation, cutting the gases, but the adaptation thing is also an equally important part of it that we tend to forget. And adaptation is not static. It will always have to evolve, because the climate impacts will evolve. So the pathway for you coming with that expertise is just great. It's a fantastic runway. And the last thing I would say is that there are limits to adaptation, though. So that's my caution. So the opportunities are great, but there's that caution that you should go in with. And that's why, it's always important to remember that principle of the just transition. What will my actions do, and what impact will that have for others?
That's great. Thank you very much. I think at this point we will take a break before we go on to our next speaker. If you could stay on and answer questions at the end, that would be great. And with that, we're just going to break for 5 minutes. So we'll be back at, let's say, 11:15. So stretch, get water, do what you need to do, and we will start with our next presenter at 11:15. Thank you very much. All right. Welcome back, everyone. It's 11:15, so we'll go ahead and get started. It's always good to have a break before the next session, but it's also nice to keep going because there was a really good flow there. Our next speaker is Joanne with Advanced Biofuels USA. Joanne is the co-founder and executive director of Advanced Biofuels USA. It's a nonprofit educational organization which advocates for the understanding, development, and use of sustainable renewable fuels in the US and around the world. So Joanne actually has a presentation that she's given to high school students in the past, and we'll be going through that. So with that, thank you very much, Joanne, and I'll turn it over to you.
All right, I'm trying to share my screen. Here we go, maybe, yep, all right. This is just absolutely amazing to be a part of this, of this whole group, because I hope what my presentation will do will be to build on what everybody else has been saying. I'm so glad it's being recorded so that it can be shared with a lot of other people. I'm going to be doing something a little bit different. I'm going to blast through a presentation here about not what I have done and what's happened in my life, but about renewable fuels around the world and the kinds of jobs that are connected to that. I think it'll build on a lot of the stuff that people have already been saying. One is that your career doesn't go in a straight line. A little bit about Advanced Biofuels USA. We're a nonprofit educational organization. You can see the purpose of us to basically to promote the understanding, development, and use of renewable fuels in the US and around the world. Our main tool for doing this is our website. And you can visit our website anytime you want to. We have a green jobs section. But what I want to ask to begin, what do you think of when you hear bioenergy or renewable energy? And does that include energy for transportation? And what do you think when you hear biofuels? A lot of people will say corn-based ethanol, biodiesel, ethanol, maybe even renewable jet fuel. What we're going to do for the next few minutes is do a really quick overview about what are we talking about when we talk about sustainable renewable fuels or advanced biofuels. I put in the chat how to get to the presentation. We did a recorded presentation. But what are they? So ethanol is a biofuel. It's not the only biofuel. It's often the one that people have heard about. You may have also heard of biodiesel, renewable diesel, sustainable aviation fuel, bioisobutanol, renewable natural gas, DME, drop-in hydrocarbons, all kinds of things that are fuel and that can be renewable. It may surprise people that our first Ford cars were built to be powered with ethanol because you didn't have gasoline all over the place, but you could make your own ethanol. And if you were out in the country, you could definitely make your own ethanol to power your mobility. And so that's originally how it was started. Interesting history about how gasoline sort of took over, but over time, we went back to mixing more alcohol in. It's obviously a good fuel. Also, the diesels also began to being used with peanut oil. So biofuels, renewable fuels is really nothing new. What we're doing today is particularly ethanol that's used in the US replaces MTBE, which was what we used for octane to keep the engines from knocking, but it was quite carcinogenic. Rest of the world can also follow our lead on that. We use it in racing. F1 is planning on going to 100% renewable fuel in a year or so. Now we do use it in NASCAR. Indy uses E85, 85% renewable fuel. We're using it in aircraft. Not much, maybe 2% of the fuel that you fly on anywhere, in particular airports, might have a blend of renewable fuel, but it's there and it's growing. Buses, this just has benefits you can get from using a renewable biomethane instead of a diesel, petroleum fuel. Trucks using it, trains, your cars, E85 in flex fuel vehicles, or diesel you can use up to B20 in many diesel engines. And maritime, people don't often think about maritime fuels. Some maritime fuels are some of the worst, dirtiest stuff out there. Changing to renewables, especially there's an international regulations that are require low sulfur fuels. Renewables can get you low sulfur and they can get you lower particulates, much cleaner fuels. And military uses, military aviation and military maritime, and also on ground marine military stuff. Tomorrow or today, heating fuel. That's another thing that people don't think about, but some states do have requirements for maybe 2 or 5% in your heating oil. And also around the world in cook stoves to replace wood, dung, things that have very smoky and health hazards with cleaner burning fuel. To see how the impact has been, there is California's low carbon fuel standard, Oregon's clean fuel program, and the federal renewable fuel standard that have realized true gains in cleaning up fuels that we use today. For tomorrow, fuel cell cars using renewable fuel, renewable hydrogen or renewable ethanol, and more efficient engines that use higher octane fuels, and you can get a lot more octane out of renewable ethanol. And rockets, you know, with the rockets that have been going up for recreation purposes lately, we need to put some work into transferring those to being more renewable. A little bit of how are they made, and I think this is where some of the jobs are going to come in. Agriculture, forestry, aquaculture, we really haven't talked about those today, so I'm glad to be able to bring those on, along with waste management for a circular economy. Because what we're talking about is a carbon cycle. Why not recycle the carbon that is already above the ground rather than taking stuff that's in deep storage out of the ground as coal, petroleum, or natural gas? Leave that stuff there and just recycle what we already have. So here's some of the crops that can help us do that. Crops and agricultural waste. So things that had been just left on the field to rot or that were burned. And also flue gases from industry, to be able to take those flue gases and make fuels out of them. When we talk about ethanol, it's basically first generation. You make it out of things that might also be food, although let's say corn, a third of it goes to ethanol, a third of it will go to animal feed, and a third of it is the CO2 that can be captured and then stored underground. So, but when we talk about that ethanol, that's the same stuff that we drink. It's the same molecule. And how can we get ethanols, diesels, renewable diesels? What kinds of crops? I'm going to just blast through this. We've got soybeans, sunflowers, Jerusalem artichokes, canola, rapeseed, granada, camelina, pennycress. Working done with pennycress as a cover crop. So getting into climate smart agriculture with some of these things, grasses that can be grown on marginal lands. Switchgrass, maybe that also the other solution that is related to these is a erosion control. So be able to plant things for erosion control and also be able to harvest them for conversion to fuels and other chemicals so that we can replace what we're using petroleum and natural gas for. Quinoa, agave, cassava, seeds, oil seeds like jatropha, moringa, pangamia, castor seed, jojoba, and neem. And algae. Algae was really big a little while ago and still is being researched for biofuels and for many other things, but also the other things that grow in the water, the seaweeds, kelp, duckweeds, lemna, cyanobacteria. And the leftovers, as I said, the corn stover, what was left on the field. And now that there's such high yields and such intense farming, you've got to take some of that stuff off of the field or it gets the wrong kinds of bacteria there. Sugarcane bagasse, after you make table sugar or ethanol out of sugarcane, you have the stuff left over, and there's research being done to convert that as well. Energy beets, basically in the same way. These energy beet pictures are from sugar beets from often in the Midwest. Energy beets, there's research being done at University of Maryland Eastern Shore, or was done there on that. Cashew apples. I didn't know this. This is something that is being looked at in Tanzania, is using every cashew has an apple, and those apples were just waste. They've got a lot of carbohydrates in them, so why not turn them into fuels? Cannabis and hemp residues. Again, this is where there's some research being done, not in Montgomery County, but down at the University of Maryland Eastern Shore in Princess Anne, and part of the research is being done at Hood College in Frederick County, and the other piece of that research, that particular research project at Ohio State at their ag campus. Other things that can be used: biofuels waste, nut shells, cotton seeds and hulls, the rice hulls, wheats or straw that would have been burned in fields, and instead of doing that, let's make something out of them. The waste residues from sawdust or from other the parts of the tree that are used to make building materials, or purpose-grown trees that can be composted and then harvested. That's the research on that, a lot of it being done out in the Northwest or in Northern New York. And what about waste? Hyun was talking about waste. What about using all this waste also to make fuels? Used cooking oil. There's some places where you can actually take your used cooking oil to and get your renewable diesel or your biodiesel out. Like tannery waste. Landfill gas, biogas from animal waste. This is, especially at dairies, is getting to be a really big thing in California. Food waste in, I don't know if it's Montgomery County, but in the mid-Atlantic, there are some dairy farms that are, oh, I know what, it's not Montgomery County, but at Howard County, at the big transfer place. They've started doing a food waste conversion. Recycling carbon, all of these different things to be able to make into fuels and chemicals that can replace petroleum. Power to fuel, where you don't even go through a bio kind of a process. You're taking electrolyzed water or water electrolyzed it, you get your hydrogen, you pull your carbon out of the air or use what is left from your distilleries and put them together and being able to make hydrocarbons, or being able to make nitrogen that is totally green nitrogen. So here's just a couple of the sort of co-products that can be used to really have a circular economy. And here's the kinds of jobs, the kinds of work, the kinds of careers that are involved in making all of that stuff that I just talked about happen. And like I said, this is only one part of the world of biofuels. There was a DOE report that just came out this week that says that there will be about 7% job growth in the coming years. So after we grow the stuff, we've got to harvest it. So there's all these engineering and other kinds of jobs to develop the processes, the systems, the equipment for doing this stuff, because it hasn't been done before. And like I said, there's a new carbon storage, carbon capture and storage systems. And the technologies. The other part is that the technology is converting these things. Like I said, there's an enzymatic research being done here at Hood College. How do you take this bio-waste and make it into the other products? So that there's a lot of work that needs to be done on that, to figuring out what are these things, finding where enzymes exist in nature that already break down the kinds of stuff that you're working with, and how do you turn those into something that can be done on a commercial scale, on an industrial scale. Path to biojet fuel. There's a lot of research, a lot of processes. This process takes about 2 years to come up with your version of jet fuel and make sure that it can work safely in the engines that we already have today. So this is sort of a summary of what we've talked about. And then other non-bio, how do you can just take this industrial waste gases, put it through a biologic process to get different chemicals, or the company is doing ethanol now. Recycling plastics, how we can use plastics to recover that carbon, recover the what we make the plastics out of, make new plastics, or make other chemicals and other fuels. Electrofuels. This idea that you don't even have to go through a plant process. And here are the kinds of jobs that are involved in this piece of the puzzle. You can imagine almost all this is going to have some kind of computer component. The refineries, the conversion technologies, those are all driven by sensors and computers. But you need like real people doing really hands-on stuff too, like pipe fitters and truck drivers and lab techs. There's really a lot of different kinds of jobs for all kinds of people in this space. Just a quick on why are they important. I think anybody on this probably already has figured this out. This is what we have. This is what we could have. It's pretty clear that aviation is going to have to be liquid fuels for a long time. And before oil runs out, it's becoming more difficult and more dangerous, more destructive to find it and to extract it. An oil spill in the Gulf some years ago. These aren't the kind of jobs that we want. The geopolitical pieces of this, the policy issues. And as I said, the MTBE was a carcinogen. It was banned in many states, and that's partly why we're using ethanol in our fuel now. In the US, 10%. Peak oil. Eventually, and like I said, it's there just might not be enough oil there. But this key is recycling carbon, not bringing it out of deep storage and using what we already have. Another thing is there's solutions to other problems. Like I said, erosion control, wastewater treatment, remediation of contaminated soil, nutrient management. All of these can be collateral problems that get solved as part of turning to renewable fuels. Just a couple of things to talk about on sustainability. Hayan talked about economic sustainability and how important funding is to this. That if everybody on the value chain isn't making a living, then it's not going to happen. There's got to be there's going to be money exchanged in this process. So all your financial people, there's a place for you. In the environmental parts, we've talked about the environmental pieces of that this can be absolutely important part of environmental sustainability. And people have also mentioned the social aspects. It has to fit into the community. It has to be a help to the community. It has to be part of how the community works. And that is really, it's not going to happen if it's not. There's a company called Gevo that is really trying to incorporate all of these things into their refining process, using renewable energy, really working with the farmers on climate smart practices, reusing their waste, putting a whole lot of effort into making that system, all of that system happen. But policy, we've been talking about getting ourselves off of our addiction to oil for many years. All of this is a great link to an old John Stewart piece, quoting and having the videos of all of these different presidents talking about how we got to get off our addiction to oil. Like I said, the renewable fuel standard has been one effort to do that. The California's low carbon fuel standard, and in Europe, the renewable energy directive. There are biofuel mandates all around the world, although often they are more aspirational than actually achieved. And here's just some other kinds of policy considerations that are related to this. What I really wanted to get to is this slide about the jobs. I'm really excited to have been part of this conversation because so many people talk about these other jobs, the importance of communication, the importance of communicating what's going on with science and engineering to the policy people, the importance of communicating what climate change issues really are with the people who can make policy decisions on all levels of society. I put on the website in the chat our website. You can get a version of this. There's been some updates, so if you want to get there's some extra slides and stuff that I've got on this one, and if you want those, just give me a shout and I can do that. So let me just stop sharing, if I can figure out how to stop sharing here. And um, I hope that's been useful.
Thank you. I definitely learned a lot more about advanced biofuels. It's interesting because it's not one we hear about as much. So it's great that you are kind of promoting this, and hopefully it's going to be more of a practice. That at this point, I would like to turn it over to Omotola. She was going to join us to kind of kick off the Q&A session.
Hello, I hope everybody can hear me better now. I'm using a different audio source this time. So
Yes, we can.
okay, great. Well, one of the questions that I was going to ask, well, actually, it was actually kind of summed up well by Mr. James Callahan. It was basically that, a lot of the things that were mentioned today, it had to do with like specific professions and schools and courses and whatnot. And while that is like all amazing and stuff like that, I would hate for it to be a thing where like I would have to go down a certain route to learn about some of these amazing things about like fuels and sustainability and chemical processes and climate impacts. So like if there were like what kind of ways, and this is for anybody in general, like try to implement learning or just kind of implement like opportunities for people in like high school and even younger than that to kind of just get their foot in the door when it comes to conversations like this.
Well, I'd like to answer that, being an educational organization. So we are volunteers. We're an all-volunteer organization and take on volunteers. Some of our first volunteers were high school students, and we've had some really stellar high school students volunteering with us. But our website, like I said, is a resource for everybody. And it will we have a category and a tag on there that says, what can you do? And so you can click on that and really find some practical things. The other thing we did was last year for Earth Day, all of the days up to Earth Day in April, we posted a different suggestion, a different little bit of information, and then always included suggestions about what you can do. How can you do this in your life? So just go on our site and look for just do Earth Day 2021 and find that.
All right, thank you a lot for your answer. Definitely try to just like let just the common person know. One more question I kind of have, and this is also just another general question, is just that like I'm sure that like, I mean, I think Mrs. Raw, even before she left, she mentioned it, how like you do kind of face people who don't really take these kind of conversations about sustainability and fuels and just everything mentioned like all that seriously. So I would wonder how any of you guys like what you guys do kind of like bridge the gap between like your organization, your missions, and like just the general public to like care about all the things you guys are talking about.
I wanted to mention something about the how to communicate. I'm not the specialist in communication, but we do need to think how to communicate science to different audiences. And for me, from the engineering and science perspective, that is harder. So sometimes you have to know more to be able to communicate better in a simple way and look for good examples. And here I heard very interesting remarks about the complexities of the challenges that we are facing. But when we think about the human experience, we have a common human experience, so we can always tie that to how does that affect our lives? How does that affect our communities in a personal way? How it can affect our health, our quality of water, our access to electricity, And I think I see it as like going around, like we start with those things that are important for everybody, and then we look at some maybe technical and science aspect behind it, that to understand it and then to address it back. And that is also, we need to consider that people at different stages and have different opportunities and different access to different things. And so what a high school student might be able to do in a context is very different than a different student that has some privileged access, for example. But everybody can contribute, and that's an important challenge that we need to see. How can we involve people with different backgrounds and different privilege and access to really be able to provide justice in the long term, because it's a long-term effort.
Let me add something, and Omotola, what you did with Montgomery County, participating in that process, I was doing here in Frederick County. We're in the middle of it. We should have something, and it was an all volunteer effort. They put no funding into it in our county like they did in Montgomery County, and so that was something we did. One of the high school students who was volunteering with us through the pandemic did a really great presentation about biodiesel buses and electric buses and comparing the emissions possibilities from investments in those. So it's very possible, and I think you had a good example of how people can get how people can and should get involved in that.
All right, thank you very much for answering my two questions. I will now give the floor to whoever else has questions.
Thank you, Omotola. We do have a question here from Jerdy. It's to Dr. Tyrone Hall. She wants to know, how can a person consider a career that connects low and sustainable development project management without feeling like they're going in all directions? So yeah, to summarize, it's sort of, how do you link low and sustainable development?
Oh, great. I think that's a fantastic question. There is this growing body of work around environmental law, and it's really the foundation of everything. I think you have a natural pathway for that. So I'd suggest two things. You can do the general readings around it. There's some open source courses that will give you a really good foundation to start with, and give you the options of saying, do I go into a general law program and focus on building out that skill set squarely, and then after that you specialize in environmental law? Or do you enter with that track as a complementary piece? And I think that might be the most efficient piece, because the follow-on opportunities, including the internships, the fellowships in that field, are immense. So yeah, start looking for the programs that have that natural connection.
And following up on that question, do you see that there might be a sort of a new field that might be very popular and necessary in the coming decade or so that students can start thinking about?
I think it's finance. It is, and it's a great question, because like when I started, and I think someone said this earlier, I'm not sure who said it in the presentation, which is the jobs and the opportunities that will emerge in 5-10 years from now, even in this space, we don't even know what they are yet. So a great deal of agility around how you'll pivot will be necessary. But the whole finance landscape, I think, is really where the big decisions are going to be made over the next couple of years. It's unfortunate that that's where that's shifting, but whatever expertise you work on, always think about how you're going to connect to that or translate those messages with the asset manager world, the investment world, capital markets, finance ministries, and in order to maintain some decision-making focus on the end impact.
Thanks. Yeah, that's great. It's all about the money at the end of the day, right? Unfortunately. Dr. Marcel or Joanne, do you have anything to add in terms of careers you see growing in the coming decades?
I'll say, I think one interesting transition, we talk about just transition and taking jobs and skills that people have now, and as the world changes, what are they going to be? For example, the people who are working in petroleum refineries, they could a lot of the same skills are needed for other refineries that make liquid fuels and gaseous fuels that we're still going to need for our mobility and for making the chemicals and things. We're not going to get away from plastics. I can't think of a computer that's going to be made out of wood, but if it can be made out of sustainable plastics, and be all recyclable, and with that thought from the very beginning, that's, I think, where I'm hoping that the jobs are for people figuring out how to do those things. There are companies struggling to be able to do that now, and we need to get them the financing. We need the research. We need the understanding of that's where we need to be going, and that's where we need to get the job.
And thank you. I also wanted to add that what I think is the future for this kind of movement to really have success is to have more social business, social entrepreneurship. It's not enough to have a ongoing business with enough profit to keep going, but we need businesses that are sustainable as a business, but also provide a social benefit. And I think that if we really work on that, it could open up business opportunities that people that are just thinking making money are not going to be able to see. And we need to be able to unlock that potential and use that not as a limitation, because we also want to be socially responsible and provide a social benefit, but as an advantage, because we will be able to see things that other people are not being able to see, and that create opportunities for some new fields, but maybe some is like old fields, like back in the day, the mathematicians were philosophers, for example. So it's not really new. It's more about integrating skills and knowledge. Today, people talk about interdisciplinarity in the job. I want to see more, for example, anthropologists working with finance, not to maximize profit, but to build a really strong social business in different parts, as an example. And I want to see also more people that are experts at coding and are artists, and also into the humanities, and can communicate with people and work with communities, and some that have engineering background and can communicate very well. And this, I think, is going to be important in the future. I like Tyrone said, I cannot say exactly like what are the future jobs, but I have the sense that there's going to be a greater need for integration to manage the complexities that we are seeing. And it's not only in Puerto Rico and the wildfires in California. We see the power grid in Texas failing. We see the Belgium and Germany floods killing hundreds of people. It's getting different places, and it's going to have a value as a career. But again, if we keep our focus and our morals centered, the opportunities are going to come. We need to be brave, and I'm sure there are other brave people like Omatola, and that we are here to support that. It's going to be a challenging road, and there is a collective work to do in that area.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's definitely a challenge, and you cannot discount that it is a challenge. So it's good to be upfront about that. Do any of you have any tips for aspiring eco-entrepreneurs?
I want to say quickly that to start as local as possible, as you think of the global network that is needed as a challenge, to always start what we can do in our local communities, and then expand from that to go to a global level, but the local challenges and opportunities are important. And sometimes we ignore as we travel abroad and look at issues in other places, and we sometimes forget about the ones that are in our own backyard. So that's something that I think is very important.
Thank you.
I would say that to recognize from all and to realize from all of these stories that people have told about their lives that nobody went in a straight line. You follow your nose to where the opportunities are. As somebody was saying, that the world when you're 16 is not going to be the same world when you're 26 or when you're 46 or when you're 66. So you don't expect that the choice that don't be afraid to make a choice now and pivot and change later, but follow where your interest is, follow what your heart is, and then you'll be okay.
Thank you. And Dr. Tyrone, I know you're at a startup, so that might be sort of an eco-entrepreneurship as well. Do you have anything on that?
Yeah, there's the whole politics of how we value our work when we have passion around it and delivering it. So, and I'm getting a bit more details about it because I think it's an important point to make. So our founder, who pretty much convinced me to make the switch from working with a partnership to Manifest this year, deeply passionate about it. A lawyer by training, but also did a master's in environmental studies. She comes to it with a lot of the passion that many of us have. So we connected on that. But I think she made a transition to taking a business approach to it because she recognized one of the big challenges in the sustainability space, which is there is a business proposition to it. And when we speak the language of business, we kind of drive decision making and allow more of society to realize that there's value to this. There is that value for the things that you also see as routine. It's a part of the connection. So I would say when you come up with your great ideas, even if it's as a social business, create that linkage and think through the use cases and the value proposition very carefully, even the logic of business. Take some of that and infuse it in your approaches. And when you test it locally and you learn and you develop it, just take that really serious strategic mindset. It's not just a little project. There is value to it, is what I would say.
Great, thank you very much. So I think that brings us to the end of the questions that we had in the chat. And we're also coming up on our time. So really appreciate everybody taking the time and joining us today for this discussion. I definitely enjoyed it and learned a lot. So really appreciate it. We do have a survey that we're going to send out, or it pops up when we end the Zoom session. And if you can kind of fill out that survey, that would be great. And with that, I think we're going to wrap up just on time at noon, and wish everybody a great weekend. And thank you so much for participating.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.